The fluorescent lights above me hummed like restless bees, a constant drone that drilled into my temples. My chest still ached from the sharp, crushing pain that had sent me to the floor earlier that day at the Atlanta Historical Museum, where I had worked as an archivist for nearly 20 years. The doctor's words still rang in my ears. Stress-induced arrhythmia. You need to slow down. Mrs. Atterrow, Holloway, at 64. I had been fooling myself into believing that I could carry the weight of everything on my shoulders: work, grief, and the loneliness of widowhood. But my body had decided it was done pretending. I lay on the gurney in the ER, waiting for test results, when my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a tag on social media from my daughter-in-law, Sabrina. For a second, I allowed myself a fragile smile. Maybe she had posted a get-well message, something kind or supportive. My finger trembled slightly as I tapped the screen. Instead of kindness, a photo filled the screen. My son Daniel sat at the head of my dining table, the seat that had belonged to my late husband Robert. Sabrina was radiant in the chair I once claimed, her manicured hand resting possessively on the polished wood. And there was my granddaughter, Lila, just 11, caught mid-laugh at something I couldn't hear. Around them, the table was laden with roasted chicken, sides arranged on platters, wine glasses lifted in cheer. My dining room, my table, my family without me. The caption under the photo cut deeper than any chest pain. Finally, peace at dinner. No drama queen tonight. Blessed family. Drama-free. A string of hearts and smiley faces followed. Already 47 likes. I saw comments from Sabrina's friends, even from my own sister-in-law. So much calmer without her, one had written, punctuated with laugh-cry emojis. The buzzing in my chest grew louder than the hospital lights. They weren't worried about me. They weren't even thinking about me. While I lay hooked up to wires in a sterile hospital corridor, my family was celebrating my absence. A nurse returned with discharge papers. She smiled politely and asked, "Your son is coming to pick you up, right?" I glanced at the timestamp on Sabrina's post. 20 minutes earlier, exactly when the hospital would have called Daniel. He knew. He had chosen to lift his glass at dinner instead. I folded the discharge papers carefully, tucking them into my purse. My voice surprised me with its steadiness when I replied, "No, I'll call a taxi." And as I sat in the hospital lobby, scrolling through that cruel photo, I did something I hadn't dared in 3 years. I called Helen Carter, the realtor my husband and I had trusted decades ago. "Helen," I said, my voice low but firm, "it's Margaret Holloway. I am ready to sell the house." 3 years earlier, my life had felt like a cracked vase, held together only by habit and memory. Robert's funeral was still fresh in my mind, the folded flag pressed into my hands. The empty silence in our Brookhaven home, the way every corner seemed to echo his absence. I had been married to him for 39 years, and suddenly I was alone in a 4-bedroom house built for laughter and family dinners. That was when Daniel started showing up more often. He'd stop by with Sabrina and little Lila, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just staying to sit on the porch. I thought grief was pulling us closer together. One warm evening, as the cicadas sang in the pines, Daniel leaned forward, his eyes full of concern. "Mom, you shouldn't be rattling around in this big house by yourself. It's not healthy." Sabrina nodded with her best imitation of sympathy. "All those memories. Everywhere you turn, it must be exhausting. We worry about you." Their words pierced me, not because they were cruel, but because they seemed so reasonable. The truth was, I did feel overwhelmed. Some nights I found myself wandering the halls, staring at Robert's books, his shirts still folded in the drawers, unable to breathe. So when Daniel suggested a temporary arrangement, me moving into a cozy condo near downtown while they stayed at the house to take care of it, I let myself believe it was a kindness, just for a little while. "Mom," Sabrina assured me, resting her hand over mine. "Until you decide what you want to do long term. Maybe a year at most." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that family really meant protection. The first signs should have warned me. Daniel quickly insisted all important mail be redirected to the house. "You don't need to be buried under bills and paperwork while grieving," Head said. I agreed, grateful at the time. Within months, they were fully moved in. Sabrina repainted the living room, covering the wallpaper Robert and I had chosen together. My belongings disappeared into storage boxes I never saw again. Leela's toys filled the den where Robert's guitar once leaned in the corner. Meanwhile, I signed a lease on a small one-bedroom apartment near Piedmont Park. Every month, I paid rent. While they lived mortgage-free in the house, Robert and I had sacrificed decades to own. Whenever I hinted at them moving out, there was always a crisis. Daniel's job was unstable. Sabrina was considering going back to school. Lila needed stability in her school district. Each excuse sounded urgent, impossible to argue against. And, slowly, I began to feel like a guest in my own family. Invitations to dinners grew fewer. My birthday was forgotten twice. Family photos appeared online without me in them. I told myself it was just bad timing, just miscommunication. I didn't realize until much later that none of it was accidental. While I was grieving, they were building a life that no longer included me. The morning after my hospital discharge, I sat at my small apartment's kitchen table with a cup of coffee that suddenly tasted far too bitter. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sabrina's caption, "No drama queen tonight." My own family was celebrating my absence like it was a holiday. When Helen Carter knocked on my door at exactly 9 a.m. Her sharp knock carried the authority of someone who had been closing deals in Atlanta for 40 years. She swept into my apartment in a tailored suit, silver hair pulled back, and set her leather portfolio on the table. "Margaret," she said, her voice crisp but warm. "I wondered when you'd finally come to your senses about that Brookhaven property. It's prime real estate. But before we talk numbers, there's something you need to see." Behind her came another woman, slimmer, younger, with hawk-like eyes and a stack of folders. Helen introduced her. "This is Patricia Lane. She's an attorney who specializes in family property disputes. I thought it wise to bring her along." Patricia wasted no time. She spread out documents across my tiny table. "Margaret, I need to ask you something directly. Did you ever sign a lease agreement with your son and daughter-in-law? Any rent payments? Any written contract at all?" I shook my head. No. It was just family helping family. Patricia exchanged a glance with Helen. "That's good and bad." Good, because you retain full ownership. Bad, because after 3 years of continuous occupancy, they could try to claim tenant rights. In extreme cases, they might even attempt something called adverse possession. My heart stumbled. "Are you saying they could legally take my house?" "Not easily," Patricia assured me, "but they'll fight if you try to remove them. Well, need to be careful, thorough, and fast." Helen opened her portfolio and slid over a thick packet. I pulled recent property tax records. There were several liens filed in the last 18 months, then released. Home improvement loans. Did you know about those? I stared at her, the words not sinking in. "What kind of loans?" "Roof repairs, a new HVAC system, even cosmetic updates," Helen said. "Tens of thousands of dollars borrowed against the house's equity. All under your name." I shook my head, disbelief tightening around my throat. I never signed for any of that. Patricia leaned in, her eyes narrowing. "When was the last time you checked your credit report?" I fumbled for an answer. 2 years ago. Maybe. Patricia tapped the folder. We need to check it immediately. If they've been intercepting your mail, there could be far more than loans. There could be credit cards, personal lines of credit, all in your name. As she spoke, a sickening realization washed over me. For 3 years, I'd been living like a guest in my own life. And now, it seemed, I had been paying for their dream without even knowing it. By the next morning, the storm had already broken. My phone buzzed so violently on the counter, I thought it might rattle itself onto the floor. Caller ID, Daniel. I let it go to voicemail. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time, Sabrina. Their persistence was as relentless as the buzzing fluorescent lights from the ER. Finally, I picked up. Mom? What the hell is going on? Daniel's voice was sharp, full of disbelief. Some realtor is claiming she's listing our house. Our house. I took a slow sip of my coffee, steadying my breath. Not our house. Daniel. Mine. The deed has always been in my name. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then Sabrina's shrill voice cut in, clearly on speakerphone. That's ridiculous. We've lived here for 3 years. We've invested in improvements, paid bills, maintained it. Paid bills? I interrupted. Every utility, every repair, every gallon of paint was on my dime. And those so-called improvements? Patricia showed me the liens. Loans taken out against my house in my name, without my consent. Daniel's voice rose. Mom, you're being dramatic. We were just trying to help. You know the house needed work. I laughed bitterly. Dramatic? You mean like posting a photo of yourselves at my dining table while I was in the hospital? The caption, do you remember it? Finally. Peace at dinner. No drama queen tonight. Ring any bells? For the first time, there was nothing but silence. I could almost hear Sabrina's breath catching. You were in the hospital? Daniel finally asked. His voice softer. Yes, I said, my tone flat. While I was hooked up to machines, you were raising a glass in my husband's chair. Sabrina tried again, her words tumbling over themselves. That post wasn't about you. People blow things out of proportion online. I set my cup down with deliberate precision. You're right. People do blow things out of proportion. Like taking out a $90,000 home equity loan under my name 6 months ago. The silence on the line turned heavy, suffocating. Then came Daniel's panicked stammer. Mom, you don't understand. We had no choice. My job. Don't. I cut him off. Don't insult me with excuses. You stole from me, and you tried to erase me from my own family. Their voices collided on the speaker. Sabrina snapping, Daniel pleading. I let them drown in their own noise before pressing end call. Then, for the first time in years, I opened a blank notebook. Not for groceries. Not for chores. For truth. I began writing down every slight, every ignored call, every forgotten birthday. Each line on the page was proof not of my weakness, but of their pattern. And with every word, my resolve hardened. I wasn't going to be their silent victim anymore. The knock came just after sunrise, sharp and timid at the same time. I opened my apartment door, expecting maybe Helen or Patricia. Instead, there stood Lila, my 11-year-old granddaughter, her small frame weighed down by a suitcase nearly as big as she was. Her eyes were red, her cheeks blotchy. Behind her, a silver SUV idled at the curb. Through the windshield, I could see Daniel gripping the wheel and Sabrina in the passenger seat. Sunglasses on, though the morning was gray. They didn't move. They didn't even roll the window down. Grandma, Lila whispered, her voice trembling. Can I stay here? Mom says, we might have to live in the car if you sell the house. She told me if I talk to you, Maybe you'd remember that family takes care of each other." The words stung more than any insult Sabrina had ever hurled. They had sent their daughter, my granddaughter, as a pawn. "Come inside." "Sweetheart," I said, pulling her close. Her suitcase wheels scraped against the hardwood as I dragged it in. I made her tea and sat her at the table. "Lila, did your parents explain why I am selling the house?" She shook her head, curls bouncing. "They just said, you don't want us to be happy anymore. That you changed your mind about helping." I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "Do you remember last Christmas?" Her face lit with recognition, then dimmed. "Yeah. I stayed with my friend Sarah's family for a week. Mom and Dad said they had to go help some sick relatives. They said I couldn't come because I might catch something." My blood ran cold. Patricia's documents had shown an $8,000 charge to a resort in Turks and Caicos that very week. "Sweetheart," I asked gently, "did you ever see those relatives?" "No," she whispered. Her lips trembled. "We just had Christmas at Sarah's. It was nice, but it wasn't the same." I clenched my hands under the table. They hadn't just stolen my name, my money, my house. They had lied to their own daughter, abandoning her on Christmas while they vacationed on stolen funds. A car horn honked outside, impatient and shrill. I stood, walked Lila to the door, and together we stepped into the cold air. Daniel rolled his window down an inch. "Well, did you talk sense into her, Lila?" I leaned down to the glass, my voice steady. "Daniel, if you ever use your daughter as leverage against me again, it'll add child neglect to the criminal charges I filed yesterday morning." His face drained of color. Sabrina's sunglasses slipped as her mouth opened in protest. But I didn't wait for their excuses. I took Lila's hand and led her back upstairs, her small fingers gripping mine like a lifeline. That evening, my apartment felt heavier than ever. Lila curled up on the sofa with her stuffed rabbit, trying to distract herself with cartoons. I sat at the table with Patricia and Helen. Their folders spread like a war map. The air was thick with paper and truth. Patricia adjusted her glasses. "Margaret, I've gone through the credit reports line by line. It isn't just the home equity loan. There are 3 credit cards in your name, each with limits between $15,000 and $20,000. A personal loan for $30,000. And store accounts, jewelry, clothing, even a spa membership, all linked to your old address." Helen tapped the stack of papers with her pen. "And here's the kicker. Every one of these accounts has payments made from a checking account tied directly to Daniel's cell number. This isn't sloppy. It's systematic." I rubbed my temples, the room spinning slightly. "So they've been living off me for almost 2 years. "Longer," Patricia said. Her tone clipped. "The groundwork started right after Robert's funeral. Redirecting mail, intercepting statements, isolating you from family decisions. It's a textbook pattern of financial elder abuse." Her words pressed on my chest like stones. I wasn't just unlucky or naive. I had been targeted. Helen cleared her throat. "There's something else. I did some digging in Savannah. Remember Robert's cousin, Anne, the one Daniel and Sabrina lived with before moving in with you?" My stomach tightened. "Yes. She died suddenly at 81. Left her house to the church." Helen slid over a photocopy. The church's attorney reported irregular withdrawals in the year before her death. Nothing conclusive, but the pattern matches what we're seeing here. They moved in, redirected mail, accounts drained, then death. I gripped the paper until my knuckles turned white. Robert's cousin had been one of the kindest women I knew. Was her sudden financial collapse more than coincidence? Patricia leaned forward, her voice low. "Margaret, they're predators. They find older relatives, ingratiate themselves during grief, then strip everything. And they don't stop. In your case, the evidence also shows consultations with elder law attorneys, guardianship specialists. My throat went dry. Guardianship? Patricia nodded grimly. They were preparing to have you declared legally incompetent. Once that happens, you lose control of your finances, your property, even your medical decisions. They'd be in charge of everything. The reality was colder than any December night. While I had been blaming myself for being too sensitive, they had been constructing a legal cage around me. From the sofa, Lila looked up, her big eyes solemn. Grandma, does that mean they were going to lock you up somewhere? I forced a smile for her sake, though my insides trembled. Not anymore, sweetheart. Not as long as I fight back. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't just about saving my house. It was about exposing a pattern that had destroyed more than one life, and making sure it ended with me. The courtroom in downtown Atlanta was colder than I expected, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and paper. I sat at the plaintiff's table beside Patricia, who shuffled documents with calm precision. On the other side, Daniel and Sabrina sat stiffly, their lawyer whispering furiously. Daniel's jaw was tight. Sabrina dabbed at imaginary tears with a tissue, her face pale, but her eyes darting with calculation. The judge entered, a gavel striking, and the room stilled. Patricia rose first. Your Honor, what we have here is not a misunderstanding within a family. This is a calculated case of financial exploitation, identity theft, and attempted guardianship abuse. She laid out the evidence: fraudulent accounts, forged signatures, redirected mail, and a $90,000 loan in my name. On a projector, statements appeared: charges for luxury vacations, jewelry, spa treatments, all traced back to their address. Daniel shifted in his seat, his lawyer protesting weakly. Your Honor, my client was only managing finances for his grieving mother. There may have been miscommunications, but no criminal intent. Patricia's eyes glinted. If it was miscommunication, then why were guardianship petitions drafted on their laptop 8 months ago? Gasps rippled through the room. The judge leaned forward. Guardianship petitions? Yes, Your Honor. Patricia continued. They consulted with multiple elder law firms, laying groundwork to have Mrs. Holloway declared incompetent. That would have given them legal control of her estate, her assets, and her medical care. This is not care. This is premeditated exploitation. Then came the twist I hadn't expected. Jennifer Wells, Sabrina's estranged sister, stepped to the witness stand. I hadn't seen her in nearly a decade. Her voice trembled at first, but steadied. 15 years ago, Sabrina moved in with our grandmother after a minor fall. Within a year, Grandma was declared incompetent. Sabrina obtained power of attorney. By the time Grandma died, her savings were gone and her house was sold. We thought it was grief, but seeing this case, it's the same pattern. The courtroom hushed. Sabrina's tissue froze halfway to her face. Daniel stared at her, his expression a mix of disbelief and betrayal. The judge turned to them. You both orchestrated a scheme that exploited family trust. You used this woman's grief as cover, and you manipulated her granddaughter as leverage. This court does not tolerate such abuse. Her gavel struck once more. Temporary custody of the minor, Leila Holloway, is granted to Mrs. Holloway. Criminal charges of identity theft and fraud will proceed to trial. This house of lies ends here. I exhaled, for what felt like the first time in years. For once, the silence wasn't heavy, it was liberating. 18 months later, the sound of laughter filled my backyard in Decatur. A sound I had once feared I would never hear again. Lila was perched halfway up the tree. She and the neighbor's grandson were turning into a treehouse, hammering a crooked sign that read, Clubhouse, no drama queens allowed. The sunlight filtered through the leaves, warming the modest brick house Robert would have loved. It wasn't the grand Brookhaven property I had lost. It was better. It was mine, built on truth instead of lies. Daniel was serving time at the state facility for fraud and identity theft. Sabrina had been sentenced to community service and restitution. The house they had once called theirs was sold. The proceeds used to pay back part of what they had stolen. The carefully crafted image of perfect family life that Sabrina paraded online had crumbled. People who once laughed at her captions now whispered about her downfall. For Lila, the changes were hardest. She had to testify about Christmases spent alone, about being used as leverage. Yet children adapt faster than we think. Therapy, a new school, and a home without lies gave her space to heal. She was thriving, bright, determined, already wiser than most adults. Some nights she would crawl into my lap and whisper, "Thank you for fighting back." And each time, I swallowed tears, knowing I had nearly let fear silence me. I had changed, too. I no longer apologized for existing. I no longer accepted scraps of affection wrapped in manipulation. I had joined a local elder abuse prevention network, sharing my story to help others see the warning signs before it was too late. Each time I spoke to a new group, I thought of Robert, his steady voice reminding me that silence in the face of cruelty is just another form of surrender. Looking back, I don't regret selling the house. I don't regret filing charges. The only regret I carry is that it took me 3 years to open my eyes. I allowed guilt and loneliness to blind me to the truth. Love that demands your erasure is not love at all. The deepest betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from the ones who smile at your table while slowly cutting away your place at it. I had to learn that protecting myself wasn't selfish. It was survival. As the hammering on the treehouse grew louder, I stepped outside, watching Leela wave from her perch. Her grin was wide, unburdened. For the first time in years, I felt something powerful settle in my chest. Peace. Not the fragile kind that comes from staying quiet, but the lasting kind that comes from standing tall. "Grandma," Lila called down. "Come see." And I did, walking toward a future we had built together, free from lies, free from fear. When I look back on everything, I realized the hardest part wasn't losing money, or even the house. It was admitting that the people I trusted most had chosen betrayal over love. I carried guilt for years, convincing myself I was too dramatic, too demanding, when in truth, I was simply asking for respect. What I learned is that silence protects abusers, but truth protects us. Boundaries are not cruelty. Documentation is not paranoia. And protecting yourself, even from your own family, is not selfish. It is survival. Now, I live with peace that doesn't require me to shrink or apologize. I hope my story reminds others that you are never too old, too tired, or too alone to stand up for yourself. What about you? What lesson do you take from my story? And from which city are you watching today? I would love to know in the comments.